move the technology for my paper, though. Very environmental. Oh, God. Oh, shit. I guess I shouldn't have moved it. It fits right back in.
There we go.
The people in the booth know me, and they're probably like, yeah,
There we go.
you saw that coming. Well, thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Creative Mornings and Kayla and the volunteer team. They made it really easy for me to not mess up other than that. But ready to be prepared for today to talk about, this is actually my first Creative Mornings. So are there other people whose first time it is? Oh, all right, so we're all first timers here. We're gonna make up a new way to do Creative Mornings that's like just for us, and the old people can just deal with it. Also want to give a shout out to the sponsors, to UICA. I love this venue, so thank you for all the staff here to make this really easy. And I know they usually have their movies that show all times of the day, but hopefully they're not too mad. We got them up early also on a Friday morning. And then also just overall thank you to the people that have helped me develop, that have helped me learn, that have given their grace and patience for me to navigate my own journey in this space. I also want to just take a second. I think it's really important for me to also just acknowledge the privilege that I'm holding right now, not only for the privilege of how I've gotten here today, being a white, college-educated, arguably middle-class individual, that it just inherently brings a lot of my own journey and experience into this presentation. Hopefully you can identify with some of it, but these learnings are my own. They're through my lens. They're from my own perspective and learnings. Also, because I have the microphone, you guys think I'm an expert, so I also acknowledge that privilege as well. So thank you guys for being here again. So if I do, you said 20 minutes? Okay. So 10, all right, so turns out water is like a really big topic. There are a lot of different ways to do this. So I know I'm really curious to see what the other chapters come up with, but as a kind of as an experiment and as a methodology of my own, I wanted to crowdsource this presentation by asking my network, if you had 20 minutes to listen about water, what would you want to hear? And it was just a Facebook post. I got probably a dozen different answers from a dozen different responses. Microplastics in the Great Lakes, conservation tips at home, even like prescription disposal best practices, Nestle, groundwater, Line 5 in the Straits of Mackinac, all of these really great ideas. And I was like, I have 20 minutes. My favorite was my oldest sister, who said something really cool and then something really scary. And I was like, okay. If you've ever been to an environmental lecture before, it's always doom and gloom, so that's fine. I can check that box probably. So my sister, as always, is the one that's right. So water is obviously a really big topic. I'm not actually going to talk to you about a specific water issue. I'm going to talk about water as a movement building principle, as a unifying principle, and as almost its own social issue that I believe is an opportunity to actually mobilize and grow a movement that's going to be essential for us to actually grow and build in order to make the kind of cultural and social change that we need to address the cultural and social issues that we're facing today. I'm going to use our water as a practical example of a campaign that I was interacting with last fall. That's going to trip me later. I'm going to use our water as a practical example of movement building through organizing, mobilizing, activism, and storytelling. And at some point, we'll sprinkle in like your own role in this. There's plenty of time for that, but. Yeah. So it turns out movements are made up of people. They're made up of individuals. They're made up of your voices. They're made up of your passions. They're made up of your actions. And it's really, the movement becomes a movement when it's collectively done, when it's done with a unified vision, with a unified goal, possibly a unified strategy, right? But movements are actually made up of people. Organizations are made up of people, right? So there's going to be a little bit of moving from a macro to a micro perspective here, so bear with me if you can follow along with me. But we all have an actual individual role in movement building, especially since you guys care about water. Either you just got the tickets and you were like, finally I got into Creative Morning, I'll listen to whatever they're going to talk about, or you're like every other Michigander or anyone else that's ever seen the Great Lakes and you understand the value and the importance and the real moral imperative to actually protect our water, drinking water in the Great Lakes, etc. For environment, but also for people. So me, I have a role in this. I've lived in Grand Rapids for a bit of time now. I see myself as an organizer. I'm a storyteller. I'm a listener to stories. I'm a bridge builder. I really value connecting people and being a community resource. So those are the kind of roles that I play. I also believe pretty strongly in accountability. I believe strongly in being critical of our status quo, not just accepting the path that we've been on, but also challenging where we can improve so that we can be a more inclusive community. So as you're thinking about this and experiencing this talk, challenge yourself to think, well, what is my role in this? This isn't all cookie cutter stuff. This is not copy and paste stuff. I should use marketing communications lingo like copy and paste. Oh man, I should have had another cup of coffee. Organizations also have roles in movement building. I work at the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. Our role is in political, electoral, state politics. Super fun. Everyone can sign up later. I didn't even bring a clipboard because I'm going to need you to take your own action today and not make it so easy that I'm going to make you take action. But we are a political organization, nonpartisan, working on environmental politics in the state. So that's our lens. We're working in the system to change the system from within the system, right? It also provided me some clarity and capacity to explore our water, and it gave me resources, it gave me capacity to actually work towards protecting our water in a mobilizing and credible way. So like credible, not incredible, or both, if you ask my boss. So before we go too far, just so we're on the same page, what is environment? Let's actually like ground ourselves a little bit before, it's almost Earth Day. If you're in the environmental world, it's Earth Month. But like what's environment? When you hear environment, let's do like word association stuff. Nature. Where things live. Yeah, you guys can like shout. I know you had Ferris coffee, so. Say what? Ecosystems. Yeah. Traditionally, we think of trees. We're thinking of hiking. We're thinking of Great Lakes. We're thinking of stuff that looks really pretty and that you don't touch, that there's no humans, right? There's no human element to this. Because what we really need to understand, if we're going to try to save our water system, if we're trying to save our water movement and win, right, because it's kind of essential that our water actually is protected in the end, that we actually can drink water in the end, that people aren't being harmed by the water that they're drinking in the end, then we need to actually understand the environment that water exists in. So if we think about environment as trees and ecosystems and nature, that means that the question of who an environmentalist is supposed to be is pretty limited. This is me and my dad, right? Aw, come on, aw. I grew up hiking and camping. I mean, this is pretty traditional stuff. Certainly grew up in nature, swimming a bunch. I adore Lake Michigan. I love it deeply. I grew up on Lake Erie, so it's hard for me to say that Lake Michigan is like so much better, but it's so much better. There's a time and a place to enjoy Lake Erie, right? But what I'm trying to get at, though, is when we limit our definition of environment, we're limiting who environmentalists are allowed to be. And if we're just relying on environmentalists to save the world, then our water system and our ecosystem as a humanity is in trouble. So here's the doom and gloom part, right? But what I want to challenge you with is to actually broaden our definition of environment. To just think about what is the space you're occupying. Your environment is your house. If you talk to any kind of folks who are in healthy homes sectors, you'll know that they care a lot about your home environment. If you think about your neighborhood, is it an urban environment, is it a farm? You're allowed to be generic, you're allowed to be broad on what you define as an actual environment. When we start to broaden what's acceptable as an environment, we can broaden what's acceptable for environmentalists to care about and for what environmentalists to actually work towards and work on. A little bit, something I'm going to challenge you guys on a little bit here. Thank you. No one's ever said I wasn't loud enough, so I appreciate that. All right, so another quick quiz. Are these words interchangeable? Let's do a show of hands, yes. You guys are like, you tricked me last time. I'm not going to fall for that. Are these words not interchangeable? Let's see, no. Yeah. Okay, so you're both right. Because it depends on your orientation to the movement, about how you actually understand and see these words. These words are used often. These are jargony words if you're in the environmental movement or outside the environmental movement. You've heard these words. If we think about water as our theme today, just some examples of why these words are different when you're in the environmental movement. Sustainability advocates would see water and maybe it's sustainable business practices. So you would think of like water conservation efforts in a manufacturing or using gray water in a brewery, right? So a reuse of water in a manufacturing kind of setting. Conservation is the let's clean up this lake and then don't touch it except to fish because we got to stare at it, right? Climate justice, we start thinking about water through floods, through hurricanes, through rising sea tides, right? So all of these movements are actually segments of the environmental movement. They all have their own timelines for goals. They all have their different goals. They have different strategies, long story short. They have different partners. They have different allies. There's different people associated with these different movements. If you're not in the environmental movement, it's pretty easy to say, all these people are doing all this stuff all the time, so we're good, right? If you're in the environmental movement, you know that this is actually a pretty segmented movement. Now, all this work is really, really important. So don't walk away from this saying that like environmentalists suck. They're obviously essential, but if this is what we're limiting ourselves to save water, we're going to lose. Just dramatic silence. But in reality, if we don't shift our culture and if we don't broaden our understanding of who water activists should be and can be, and we're just relying on the small group of people that are in these spaces, we're not going to succeed. We're working really hard. I'm working in this space, right? We work really hard to win as much as we can. We're not winning enough fast enough without more people to join and build the movement. Now, you can invite me next month to talk about like the historical dynamics of the environmental movement and why it's exclusionary. That's for another month. But long story short, we need our movements to grow. There's a necessity for us to protect our water. We need our culture shift to actually happen. So now that I said that environmentalists can't save the world, you can. This comes back to our individual roles in movement building and in growth. Movements are made up of individuals. Individuals have passion. You need numbers of passionate people to agree to the same basic principle in order for you to have a movement that's actually going to have enough of a threshold to move. So again, I'm an organizer, I'm a listener, I'm a storyteller, I'm a connector. But what is your role? I'd argue that in movement building, there's a couple of basic principles that we should follow. Excuse me. I'm sorry, boxed water. I really love my reusable water bottles. I have a ton of them, as you can imagine. People always give them away and stuff, Organizing, activism, storytelling is the foundation, the philosophies of movement growing and movement building. We're all agents of change, and we kind of all need to be agents of change. Organizers are the entity that actually supports activists. They are the listeners, they're the encouragers, they're the folks who can identify leaders who can support and develop those people. They're the strategists oftentimes, they're the cheerleaders. They're the people sometimes behind the scenes. So maybe you're an organizer, or maybe you know other people who are. There's also activists and storytellers. Now, obviously, we're just going to have a morning of just redefining like every word that I'm going to jargonally say. So activism, not just people going to protests, right? Activism is not just the people clicking through on a social media account. If you can be more generous again and broad in your activism, you can include things like behavior change. You can include things like influencing your network. You can include things like going lobbying or going door knocking for a candidate or heck yeah, go to that rally. I mean, that certainly counts too. Even like your personal protests and accountability measures that you're going to run on your own. This is all activism. And you guys are here for a reason. You care. You have passions. There's no doubt about that. You also have stories. And you also have people that haven't heard those stories before. And I really, I want to encourage you guys today to just tell others why you care, why you activate. Why are you participating in this? Why does it matter to you? When we're able to develop storytelling as a mechanism for organizing and activism, it's actually a trigger for growing relatedness. It's a trigger for finding values that match with each other, where you're able to remove yourself from any kind of other stereotypes, but actually build a connection one-on-one with somebody through your storytelling and vulnerability. A practical example of this is the #OurWater that you saw earlier. This was an electoral campaign. So a reminder, I work for an organization that is involved with state, electoral, and political legislative politics. So this is just an example, guys, right? You can do activism in a lot of ways. This is an example here for practically applying, organizing, mobilizing, activism, and storytelling. The purpose was to raise the platform of water across the state. We did early polling last year that showed Michiganders cared about water more than any other issue in every region of the state. That's the first time that's ever happened. Like literally every region of the state, they were like prescription drug costs and water. Well, there's a longer story about the prescription drug costs, but for the first time ever, water was identified as a political #1 issue in every region of the state. Now you know why, right? I mean, you've heard about the triggers and the issues and the news reports of PFAS, of Line 5, of white communities facing drinking water issues for the first time, really visibly. We know that Flint, 5-year anniversary is still coming up with folks that still don't have access to clean water in their own homes from a decision that was made politically. So we raised the platform and also provided space for storytelling for the candidates to see that there are a lot of people in Michigan, Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, that care an awful lot about water and want their elected officials to do something about it. This is an example of storytelling. I'm going to call out my friend because she's right there in the little corner. She did one of these videos for me. We also had like Grand Rapids Poet Laureate, Fabled Poet, did little montages. Our video series for our water campaign was collected in less than a year. Stories from across the state, different water issues, different styles, so the selfie style, news reporty style, different montage videos, interview style, all that kind of stuff. Got over 4.6 million views in 6 months during the election season. Now, what this continued to do was reinforce that people want to hear stories about stuff they care about, water, they identify with these stories too. They identify that I also care about water, right? It isn't up to you to decide whether your story is a relatable one or not. We have a variety of voices and perspectives represented in our video series because we know that there's a lot of different kinds of people out there that care about water. They all cared about water. No matter what they were talking about, it all came back to water. Why does this matter? Because movements need wins. They need to have celebration moments. And every now and then, our movements need to actually have outcomes and goals where you can actually slow down and say, good for a second. Again, through our political lens, we're doing politics and electoral work. Our wins are that we now have people in power right now who on Governor Whitmer's second day in office was signing executive orders to restructure the Department of Environmental Quality, including positive changes to add higher positions for public water advocates. Like literally first day, second day. Dana Nessel just yesterday, our Attorney General, sent out an opinion about Enbridge and Line 5. That's going to be a huge game changer for folks trying to shut down Line 5. So these wins matter, and people are prioritizing taking water actions in office right now in their first 100 days because Michiganders time and time again said that water is something they care about, whether they're independents, Democrats, Republicans, they can all support water actions. We see action happening, we see policy development happening, legislation getting developed across the aisle every day because there's problems with our water in every district. So it's not just a Democrat thing anymore, right? To care about environment. It's not just a hunter and angler thing anymore to care about environment. They're hearing from people. These people don't make these decisions unless there's people telling them to make these decisions. And so that pressure matters. The accountability matters. Fortunately or unfortunately, we're not all politicians, though. So this was, like I said, girl, this is just a campaign example. You don't have to do electoral politics to understand that organizing, mobilizing, activism, and storytelling are the kind of strategy you can repeat through different strategy lenses. So not just politics, not just electorally. But we still do all have a role to play in this. So what is your role? I know that I'm driven every day by the people that I get to work with and that the members that I get to interact with. They're kind of like my life-giving source. I do a lot of the work that I do to make sure that others are supported in their work because they're actually the inspiring members and people that I get to work with. It's a pretty incredible space, but environmentalism, water actions aren't about small actions anymore. If during the Q&A anyone asks me about I'm not going to go there, but I'm kind of over small actions because our water problems right now require a cultural shift that are going to require more people who are non-traditionally environmentalists to challenge your network, challenge the non-traditional environmentalists also in your network. We're all storytellers here. You have a story that matters and that can inspire somebody. You also might have a talent or a skill to help other people tell their stories. Maybe you're a really good listener and you're such a strong communicator that you can help other people communicate better too. We're all going to have networks that we can influence. We all have these passions. So I guess I'm just kind of wondering if we can define our environment in a new way that we think about the space that we occupy. Are we trying to improve the space that you're occupying? And what would your role be in that? And bring a friend too, that helps. That's kind of it.
Awesome. Okay, let's give her one more round of applause, guys. Yeah. So we have about 10-15 minutes for a Q&A. So if you guys have any questions about the Michigan League of Conservation Voters or anything else that Ann talked about, if you want to raise your hand, and we can do a little Q&A session. So does anyone have any questions? It's kind of dark, so raise your hand really high. I know we have some questions out there. Yes, what's your question?
So, what is your opinion on what's my role? What's your opinion on what somebody's role should be? Like, if you were to answer the question on your last slide.
I don't know you, so I can't tell you what your skills and strengths and leadership potential is. So you're asking me what your role should be, or what an individual's role should be. Be an organizer, be an activist, be a storyteller, or help someone else do those things.
Yes.
You mentioned kind of being over small actions, and it's time for bigger actions than that, which is great. For the rest of us, what is a bigger action that's that you see as like within cultural reach, right? Something that each of us could grab hold of it and go.
So the question was, within a cultural reasonable reach, what's a big action that we can all
small
own?
steps, right?
I mean, I'm personally over small steps. I know that y'all aren't there yet, too, Obviously, we still need incremental progress, right? People, you're on your own journey. We're all on our own journey. Similar to the fact that I'm not going to demonize the entire environmental movement. I'm not going to demonize people trying their darndest to do their best. There's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of cultural pressure, especially with environmentalism, to be better. For example, I've worked for environmental organizations for a long time. People have found out that I work for an environmental organization and either confess how little they recycle to me, or they brag how much they recycle to me. And it's like, I don't care. But they're looking for like the sanction that they're doing good. So please keep doing small things. I'm just not gonna spend my time all the time doing that. Big changes, I mean, we're talking about big policy decisions, getting big people elected to make big policy and legislative changes are certainly a big win. Getting something like Line 5 shut down would be a very big deal. It would be the first time in the country's history that an oil pipeline would be shut down without there being a spill before. Now, we know that there's spills, right? But for it to be shut down proactively would be the first example of that in history. That would be a big deal. I also just really like to challenge our environmental movement in Michigan with all the leaders that I get to interact with to do a better job with their diversity and equity work. It's a pretty low bar at this point because there's been so much historical and legacy to be exclusionary of a movement that there's a lot of opportunity and potential for the movement to do a lot better for a lot more people and to actually be a movement for everybody that drinks water, right? So those would be the big changes I would see.
Yes.
So let's say line 5, if you've got a couple hundred people in this room, it's more than, we can't just, write a tweet and hope that makes a difference. I mean, if you could have us all do one thing, what would it be?
About line 5 specifically?
Yeah. Well, on any issue.
Yeah, and a dozen examples. Yeah, I mean, they're all going to require different actions. Tweeting and Facebook posts only help so much as your first step to engage with somebody. I believe a lot more in engaging with people face to face. So if you're trying to influence your network, doing it where you're actually in person and being accountable to your conversation and words is a lot more powerful. I do think that everyone needs to actually go to Lansing once, meet your legislator. This is low bar, like this is accessible stuff. My job is literally to make that kind of activity easier and remove barriers to actually like interact with democracy. If we kind of think that like democracy helps, we need a functioning democracy, which means we need interaction from the people, the constituents to actually engage. So there's things like coffee hours, there's things like lobby days. They're developed to be accessible. But that doesn't mean that your legislator is necessarily making that known to you. But you building a relationship with your elected officials is important because they're making decisions for you every day. And if you don't tell them what you think, they'll never know what you think, and they'll just assume that you're good. Yeah, so my friend Stephanie Maybe from Kent County Water Conservation wants to also answer.
For line 5 specifically, there are 67 resolutions that cities have passed throughout the state, and Grand Rapids is the only major city in the state of Michigan to not pass a resolution to shut down line 5. So I think that if you don't live in Grand Rapids, the best thing to do is to get either your city government or even county to pass a resolution, because I think if all the communities across the state are also pressuring, that it increases our chances, but also reaching out to City of Grand Rapids to let them know that this is something that we want. They have signed a letter, but a letter isn't as impactful as the resolution.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Oh, I'll do 2 more questions. Okay, right there.
Yeah, I've been really curious about the Restore the Rapids project, and I think it represents a unique opportunity to get people more involved with like using the water in a recreational capacity, and I think that would breed a stronger passion for taking care of it. I'm really curious where that is right now and what the plans for the future of that.
Yeah, and it takes a long time to bring the rapids back. There actually aren't existing photos that exist of what the rapids look like because it was before photography existed. So it's been a little bit of time since the rapids have been there, so no one knows what it's actually going to look like. So you can engineer and manufacture a river all you want, and then but once you open up that dam, the river's going to do what the river's going to do. So there's a lot of permitting, as you can imagine. There's some invasive species and protected species considerations that need to be made that are that they're being very intentional about with the permitting process. Also, the Grand River might be dirty in some spots, so you just have to move slow. So it is a slow process. What's not slow is the property purchasing that's happening along the river. That's stuff that's already happened or is happening now, where developers are picking up land along the river, anticipating that the restoration project is going to happen. It is going to happen. Again, it's moving slow. It's one of those like phase 1, phase 2, it's like 2020, 2022 kind of thing. We'll do the first half of the river and then the second half of the river. So if we think about, if I can challenge you a little bit, instead of us just saying that development is good, restoration is good for the ecology, but also for our economy, be really proactive in challenging our restoration projects to think about inclusivity and about comfort to interact in spaces that might be really white culture dominant. So if we see a lot of properties along the river being developed in a way that isn't actually including any more people from the city, but maybe people from the suburbs, you know, like what's your audience goal? Is it people coming and visiting for tourism or from the suburbs, or is it folks who actually live in Grand Rapids? That's an important consideration to make. Obviously, it's going to be really cool, right? There is another dredging project that's actually getting threatened. You know that really beautiful castle in Granville? I love it. They want to have a moat now. No, I'm obviously being a little bit dramatic, but not totally. There is a project that's getting some early support to dredge a channel up 22 miles of the Grand River so that really big boats can come up for a year. It's a terrible idea. I'll just say that right now. I'll go on record, challenge it. It's a terrible idea, terrible for our ecology, almost insubstantial for our economy. But there sure are some power players in the region that want to make that happen. So it's going to be something that you'll want to watch for in the next couple of years that develop this year for sure. It's going to take a couple of years of fighting because there's already been appropriations approved in last year's budget lame duck session for over $3 million of appropriations to make the project happen. There's still a lot of permitting involved in soil sediment testing, but as you support the river restoration project, also consider that there's something else happening in the river that's not so great.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's it for Q&A, guys. If you guys want to give her one more round of applause. Thank you again.